intelligence. And it also, and this is my hope, should lead us to consider, as IT people and as business people, the ethical and social implications of what we're doing by releasing all of this information into the world. With that, I thank you. Mohammed, do we have time for some questions, or do you want to go straight to coffee? You can have 5 minutes for questions if you want to. Can we bring up the lights, please? Because otherwise I can't see a thing. House lights.
Hi. My question is regarding the slide you showed about the 5%, at most 5% of data is process-mediated metadata. What about the rest, human-sourced and machine data? What's the breakdown between those two? And how do you see that changing in the next 5 years or 10 years?
Okay, so the question is a question about the percentages of data. So I've looked at some of the studies around that purport to look at different types of information. I've also been involved in some studies that look at it. It's very difficult to actually answer the question precisely because we have good definitions of what those different types of data actually mean, and different people mean different things when they say them. So process-mediated data, I think today, is less than 5%. Other people will probably say 10 to 15%, but it's very much the minority. Today, if we look at it today, human-sourced information is much bigger and is probably, let's call it, these numbers will not add up, let's call it 60%. And the remainder, what's that, 35%, 35% is machine-generated. However, the Internet of Things is driving volumes of data that are unbelievably big, far bigger than anything we've got. So I think that what's going to happen is the social media stuff, that's the human-sourced information, is probably, it's going to grow. It's certainly going to grow in terms of volume because included in there is all of the video stuff that we're making. But it's probably going to be less information-rich, if I can put it that way. Whereas the machine-generated data is going to grow to huge numbers of records, all of them pretty small, but all of them much more interesting. So what the percentages are going to end up with, I don't know, but I think I can say for sure process-mediated data is going to be less than 1% of everything that we deal with, and probably machine-generated data, I suspect, is going to be the biggest one, and I think that's what most other people think as well. We have one just here in the middle, in the front, the second row. Just here.
Okay, thank you for conference and for lecture. Just I want to conclusion, but not professional than you, about the management for Datability. Can I say Datability content business intelligent and IT intelligent and development intelligent?
Sorry, I don't think I got the question there. Can you repeat it, please?
Can I say Datability content business intelligent, IT intelligent and development intelligent?
Can you say that Datability contains IT intelligence and business intelligence?
And development?
That sounds like a leading question.
Okay.
What I would like to say is this, because I'm not sure I can answer what Datability means, because I'm not part of Datability as the company, right? So what I would say is that from my point of view, if I look at where we need to go, we certainly need to move from, let's call it data intelligence, to something which is much more inclusive. And that much more inclusive piece includes both information in the real sense of the word, in the broader sense of what information means, but also the ability to take into account the human, I don't like to use the word intelligence, the human intelligence and the human intuition and the human processing that goes around it. And we have to bring all of those pieces together in the way of looking at the business in order to make that happen. So it's bigger than business intelligence, yes. There's one just here. Let's one more. Okay, the coffee is going cold apparently.
My name is Salih Rubian. I'm working for Al-Rajhi Bank as head of risk systems and data governance. It's a great pleasure to have you here, Mr. Dr. Barry, in Saudi Arabia. We hope you enjoy your stay. My question is mainly related to credit data warehouse. I would like to know from your experience, what are the main challenges that huge organizations they face once they implement credit data warehouses?
Okay, credit data warehouses. What are the main challenges? I think that's a real difficult question to answer in the context of a meeting this size, because first of all, when we talk about credit data warehouses, they're going to be different depending on the organization. You're clearly talking from a banking point of view. Secondly, they're going to, the way that they operate within the environment, and the social environment and the legal environment are going to be different. So Saudi Arabia is going to have a different set of governance around such matters. And I suppose thirdly, they're going to depend on the level of IT, expertise that exists within the organization. So if you've got dirty data to start with, that's a very different set of data problems than if you have clean data, but you're really working in an environment where you can collect everything you like or anything you like about people. So the big issues are going to be around cleanliness of the original data. Do I have the stuff I need? They're going to be around what are the tools that I have that I can process with them, and they're going to be around the regulatory environment about what I can gather and what I can use, and then to be able to integrate them. So there's 4 big problems to start with, and I'm sure if we were to sit down and have a conversation one-on-one, we'd have at least another 5 to deal with before very long. It's a short answer, but I know Mohammed is saying we need to call it a day. Listen, thank you very much. I'm sorry that we haven't covered all your questions. I am here for the rest of the morning, coffee and at lunch. Be very happy to talk to any of you at that stage. So thank you again very much. And it's a pleasure.
I work for a company, one of the founders of Envision, and what we basically try to do is to get you from that having all the data, but not necessarily having all the insight. And a little bio. One of the things that we typically see in most of the organizations is that people are busy, people are doing things, and one of the questions that you typically ask is, how are you doing? Well, I'm busy. And most of the people are busy processing more gigabytes, more terabytes, more data than before. So it's not whether you are really busy, but what you're doing, does it actually make sense from a business point of view? And that's basically what I'm going to try to cover today, is not to saying, are you active, are you doing things, are you capturing all these data, and are you actually trying to make sense of it? The point is, what does it bring your business? What's the added value of it? Which is why I've got this old German proverb that says, what is the point of running if you are not on the right road? So how do you know that you are on the right road? Because there's so many things to do, there's so many Facebook pages to check, there's so many tweets to read, that the point is, are you actually doing any business? And that's basically the challenge of this whole new world of having extra data, having extra information available. Does it help your business? And if you look at the environment and things that are happening, you can see a number of trends. And as Barry was pointing out, there is a huge increase of availability of data. I still come from the era when I was doing my thesis and we had to look something up. We actually went to something which was called a library. It's a place where they store books, and they have things which they were called encyclopedia, and you could look up stuff, and there was so much information, there were so many books in the library that it was one of the first things that you had to do when you did the thesis was to do a literature study, saying, what can I read, and what is already been written about this? And what has happened since? 30 years later, there's many more books to read. There is much more data to be going through. So there is so much data available that it comes to the point saying, okay, look, we've got all the data, but can we make sense of it? And the fact that the availability of data is increasing, the ultimate question is not necessarily, is there more data out there? The ultimate question is, what is happening and what is the reason for having that data available? That is that the cost of managing it has decreased significantly. And Barry was referring to the IBM 360, and there were COBOL programmers in the room, and I'm old enough to actually remember that we went into a meeting to discuss whether we should store the dates in 4 bytes or in 2 bytes. And at that point we were saying, no, it's crazy to do it in 4 bytes, because nobody could imagine that you could keep that system up to the year 2000, and that was really stupid to do that. So we said, oh, no, let's go for 2 bytes, because it's so expensive that we actually don't want to waste these 2 extra bytes, because the value for those 2 bytes is not there. And we'll figure it out when we get to the year 2000, and we did figure it out. And a lot of people made good money out of the fact that we had to go from 2 to 4. What are you seeing today is that we don't throw things away anymore. We just keep them. We have all the data. And I still remember that I was going, again in the 80s, on a 3-week vacation to the United States. And what I decided to do is take 3 rolls of film with me. And that is 3 rolls with 36 images. And those 3 rolls took me through 3 weeks of vacation. How many pictures did you already take today? And did you throw them away? No, you just keep them, you pick the pictures, and you store everything. So the cost of managing the data and the cost of keeping the data is going down, and hence the availability of the data is going up. So what you're seeing is that there's this trend of more stuff being there, it's becoming less expensive to keep it, and the ultimate question now is your ability to actually make sense of it increasing? And the ability to make sense of it is basically why we're here today. So it's not about the cost, it's not about the fact that the data is available, it is out there. But the question is, do you have, when you look at your own organization, is there a discrepancy between the amount of stuff that you have and your ability to make sense of it? And that's today, I would say, the challenge to actually keep those 2 things in balance. Of course, there's one other big driver that is out there, which is called, and that was already alluded to in the previous session, the whole concept of privacy. You can and you should be careful in what you keep and what you're going to use it for. So that's always some of the issues to say, yeah, but we can do all these things, but do you actually want to do these things? So what I'm going to focus on today is really what I would call the discrepancy between the availability and the ability to actually make sense out of these things. And what you would try to do is set up your organization in such a way that your ability to make sense of it is better and bigger than the fact that the data is available. So those 2 things need to be in sync. Now, there's an old statement. This was already published more than 20 years ago, and this concept is called data-rich, information-poor. And this is basically alluding to that gap that you have more stuff than you can actually make sense of. And what you're seeing is that there is a lot of people out there that have all the data, but they don't know how to make sense of it. And a very good story is a story that happened in Turkey a few years ago. A lady calls the call center of a telco operator. Anybody in telco? Yeah. So a lady calls the call center, and she was 18 years old, and she complains. She says, well, I have a bad signal, and I'm not really happy with the service that you're providing. And the call center person looked up the number, and he saw prepaid cards, 15 euros credit over the last month. What do you think happened to the call center person? Was that person that was calling the call center on their top priority, this is a person that I need to handle properly? I think the answer is very simple. They basically said, oh, you know what you need to do? It's not our own network. You need to get a better phone and buy something that works and then call us again. So, disconnect. Call center is no longer connected to the girl. The girl goes home in the evening to her father, and she explains the story. Turns out that the father was the CEO of one of the largest Turkish holdings. And the father said, okay, if this is the way they treat you, I will take my business elsewhere. So because of that one phone call, that telco operator lost 20% of their revenue. Now, I can see you thinking, could we have known? And the answer is very simple. Yes. Because what they had the call records. So they knew that the prepaid card was calling the father, which is the CEO. So the data was in the system, but it wasn't to a point that the call center operator could actually use that data to get the insight and saying, this looks like a low profit customer, so I'm not going to treat you properly. All the data was there. They just didn't have the ability to get the insight of saying, wait a minute, there is something going on here. This person should be treated with respect because that's 20% of our revenue. And I see people going back to the first slide saying, yes, but what about privacy? What about, can we disclose the fact that that combination exists? But there's a good way around that, because you don't have to say to the call center person, this is who the other person has been calling. You just have to say, if your customer cluster algorithm shows that this is a low profit customer, that there is a correlation with something that is high value, and just bump up the classification to say, we're not making money on this one, but it's in a network that is clearly giving us significant profit. So that's a very simple example of data rich, but information poor. And I think when you look at your own organization, there will be many events where you made decisions, business decisions, where you decided where to go, and you actually said, we didn't use all of the data that was available, and we couldn't make sense of all the data that was available. So that's basically what I call the data gap. So, and we're going to cover that during the rest of the presentation. Now, if you look at the data that is in an organization, it is more than just about big data. Because if you just handle the big data aspects, you are actually going to miss out on the actual core of what you're doing. And if you look at the data that is being managed, there are basically three different things that we manage. We manage the object, so that is the people, the person, the location, the product, things that you're working with. And once you understand those things which have a life cycle, so we're selling products to customers at a specific location, these things interact with each other, and we have formal events. And a formal event means I'm making a call, I'm placing an order, I'm visiting the website. So these are things which are potentially formal. And most of the volume that is being created, which in the space that we call today the big data space, is essentially insight that we get from the non-formal events. So if you take, for example, the GPS location, the fact that you travel, that is not a formal event. But by capturing all of these things, you can get extra insight. So the core focus today is trying to get insight out of those formal things, because the invoices, the formal events, we've done that. We know how to deal with that. But there's a whole new era of informal events of which we try to make sense. So we need to look at what the informal events are and how they could make sense within your organization. So as I said, the ability to process and the cost of processing is significantly changing. There was an interesting infograph from the Guardian, the newspaper. It says that if you go to the website, it's saying how many terabytes the NSA has analyzed since the beginning of this presentation. So there's a lot of data which is being captured and that is being analyzed. As I said, the informal recognition of the business process is driving most of the volumes, and we leave an enormous amount of traces that we didn't leave before, or at least that weren't captured before. So hence the term big data. Now this is not new. Doug Lacy wrote about that in the Meta group a while ago. And one of my problems with that concept of big data is two things. First of all, I got a very scary moment when I visited my grandmother last weekend, because she asked me whether she should get some big data for her anniversary. So we've come to the point that I would say we're beyond hype. Everybody says, oh, if it doesn't sell well, let's call it big data, and it sells. But if you start looking at that word, I mean, big, what does that really mean? I would actually say that we should look for another word. And the essence is not the fact that it's big, because there were people from telco in the room, and if you ask to a telco person what is big, and then when we look at our telco and we say how many SMS messages are sent around New Year, then you know what big is. And we've been doing that for years. So what is the problem, right? The problem isn't the size, not just the size. So it is not only the fact that it's big, there's more dimensions to the problem. And we need to keep that in mind when we start designing for that and start looking at how we want to architect that. It is not just the size. So I was thinking of, instead of big data, we do no big data, like NoSQL, but that doesn't work either, because when I do my data governance work, one of the things is when I say when you define something, you shouldn't say what it's not. So this is a wrong term. We're not going to call it no big data. So I'm come up with a new word. It's called AGV data. Now, I still need to work with some people from marketing to get this a little bit more sexy. But my point is that you shouldn't be talking about big data. You should be talking about harder to get value from, because that's the essence. The essence is it is there, but you need to take some extra steps to get value out of it. And this is why we're here, to figure out what are the things that we need to do to get value out of the data that you have. That's the whole exercise. So we're not going to talk about big data anymore. We're going to talk about HGV data. This is still a working title, so if you can give me any suggestions, feel free to pitch in and see what you can say. So the reasons that we're seeing the cost going down and is basically because more storage, more network, more CPU. But I'm not going to take you through all the technical discussions. The point is it costs less to do things, right? And by the way, we keep adding new features to the devices so that we always keep a nice balance between the price that you pay, because it never seems to go down for some point, and the features that are in there. So lots of stuff. We have smart tagging, 5 cents for a tag. We keep track of all kinds of things. And in fact, it has significantly changed the way that we work, because what you see over there is a map of the world as it was drawn by one of my fellow countrymen, Mercator, many, many years ago, right? When they were still sailing the ships, and they were trying to figure out what is out there. So that was a very low frequency of change, because those people were on a trip for 5 years, and then they came back and they had a little bit more shore that has been mapped. So the question wasn't, when was your last GPS update? It was, is it 5 years old? Is it 10 years old? And we're already happy that we're getting something. So suddenly, we invented the digital broadcasting, we send up some satellites, and we moved to GPS. And the GPS is basically a passive system. And then we said, oh, we can do better than passive, price is going down, so we go to active. And it's kind of interesting to see that many years ago, when we went on vacation with my family, it was always an interesting exercise. Especially when we got around Paris, when my mother was trying to read the map and my father was driving. Beautiful exercise. So every time when she went, go left, he said, okay, I understand, I go right, because she was holding the map upside down. So there was a lot of stress coming from there, saying, oh, wait a minute, I know where I am, but do I have to go left or do I have to go right? So what did we do? We invented the GPS. And now the car says go left. And then you hope that the car manufacturer knows what left and right is. So we start building up trust, and you say, oh, wait a minute. How long will it take me to get from the airport to this hotel? And the first question you will ask me is, when will you try to do this? Are you going to try this at 4 o'clock in the morning, or will you do this in rush hour? So what you see is that the data that we had an old map, then we had our location, and now we're saying, yeah, but wait a minute, if you don't have real-time traffic information, it's pointless. Because we're expecting insight that says, this is when you will arrive. So we get more data, get more input, and we start doing forecasting, and we're saying, I will tell you when you arrive. Actually, this thing is pretty good, because we've got all the sensors telling me how quickly we go, so we can figure it out. Interesting side effects. A very nice story of the Dutch police. The Dutch police bought the TomTom real-time traffic data. And do you know what they do with that information? They know where to position the speed cameras, because they have real-time traffic updates to know where are there any traffic enforcers, so we'll have to put the cameras there. So, interesting evolution. It depends. If you are interested in speeding, you might think twice that we don't want this big data thing to happen, because they will actually know where I'm going. I'm not sure if you caught the latest news from Ford Motor Company. where they wrote a nice letter saying, all our cars are tracking your speed, and by the way, we will not use this for the wrong purpose. Okay? So anybody that is buying a new car, we know where you are and we know how fast you drive. Right? So that's evolving, and the point is that there's event-driven, real-time going on, things we couldn't dream of many, many years ago. I have a question for you. Yeah, this will not be a passive, so you'll have to work with me because otherwise it's going to get boring. Does anybody know how many ants are born per minute? This is a very serious business question. So how many ants are born per minute? Any idea? 500,000? Okay. More? Less? Up? 1 billion? Okay. The answer is 1 billion. It creates a whole problem for naming conventions. If you think IPv6 is the solution, try naming ants. I mean, it's 1 billion a second. That's a lot. 60 million, per minute, 1 billion and 16 million a second. What do we learn from that? And it's not easy to keep track of all your children, that's one point. But the second thing is, where is the value? Because I can tell you, oh, we are capturing so many tweets a second, we are keeping so many, bringing in so many data. What is the added value? What does it bring you? And there's actually two ways of looking at it. It's the volume, the fact that I've got all the measurements. That's the value. But there's another dimension that says it's the single instance that is the value. And this is a fundamental thing when you start looking at data management. Anybody in banking? Yeah. What would happen if you lose 5% of your banking transactions? Not happy. Anybody to try to make sense of GPS data? Anybody in traffic or transportation? Yeah. What will happen if you lose 5% of your real-time traffic feeds? Okay. So, but does Google need, so the answer was, yeah, Google helps me where I am, so I keep track of my location. I feed my data to them. Then the question is, are you looking for a specific tile on the floor? Or are you basically saying, these are the restaurants in the area, so if I miss 5 minutes, I don't travel that fast, I'm not Superman, so that means that a 5-minute loss is not a problem. So depending on whether you're dealing with your bank transactions, you're basically saying, wait a minute, every record is what counts. But in the case where you have a Twitter feed or something like that, you go, oh my God. Actually, I got a message from one company a few weeks ago. They said, dear sir, we have lost our Twitter feed. Can you please retweet the things you said about us? Would that look good? I don't think so. So the point is, you should figure out when you have the data, what is the value? Is it the value that it's the volume tells you something, or is it really every single occurrence? So keep that in mind. Okay? And then you get to these bragging, I call them bragging charts. And it says, do you know what happens in a minute? So we already figured out how many ends there are. We can then say how many websites were visited, how many tweets we have. All interesting stuff. But this is really stuff just to brag and say, by the way, don't use this as a pickup line because it doesn't work very well. But you say, oh, I know how many tweets were happening a second. So the point is, what is that volume telling you? Let me ask you another question, and this is a much more fundamental one. What happens in your company in a minute? And then this happens. Silence. Oh, well, we didn't think of that. Because it's the same thing. Right? Oh, look how many tweets we have. Yeah. Okay, what's the value of that? Unless you're Twitter, you go, oh, damn, our stock value isn't going very well. So the point is, what happens in a minute? What can you use? What data is captured that could make sense for you? And there's a lot of things that happen. And what you see, we see a shift. We see a shift from BI being the yearly or monthly report to the point that we're saying, okay, how many transactions did we have? How many stock movements did we do? The key today is not anymore to understand what those formal events were, but the added value is truly in the informal events. So if you're using an omnichannel as a retailer, if you have an omnichannel strategy, it's not about knowing what you sold. It's about knowing what you didn't sell. It's about knowing which fields on the pages were used. It's knowing where did people exit the pages without buying. That is happening every minute, every second in your organization. And what I find with most companies is they don't have the ability to actually capture that unformalized event and to start making sense of it. Anybody that wants to do product master data or master data management? Okay. One of the problems is how many attributes do we have and how do we keep track of the right ones? The answer is there. You know by having those informal events which ones are actually driving your sales, which ones are not influencing the sales. So that's one of the points where most of the things, the data is captured, but you don't make sense of it today. Okay? So can we turn that and make it into a decision? So it's about having the operational viewpoint, making the operations run correctly, but more interesting is to come up with insight that allows me to do better data management, to better decide where to put what stock, where to put something in the shelf or not on the shelf. So that's what we're looking at. So the point is, what do you think, from a data point of view, will add business value? I'm going to do a short poll because you'll be sitting down for too long, so we need some arm movements. It's like in the airlines when you say when you're flying for 50 minutes, you should move your feet and arms, so we'll do that. So my question is, if you look at suppliers, products, sales locations, customers, payments, receipts, organizations, and the website log, I'm going to give you these little round stickers, and what you can do is you will put the sticker on a different object that you think is useful for your business. So who thinks that supplier is interesting to manage? Anybody? This is the part where you do something. So anybody that is interested in suppliers? Okay, a few people are interested in suppliers. Anybody interested in products? Okay, we're selling products. Do we sell them at the location? Do we care about location? Yes, we do. Anybody that wants to sell it to somebody? Customer insight? Yeah, and we have customer insight. And then we have the payment and the receipt and so on and so on. So I got my assistant in the back to quickly analyze the data with image recognition, and so we now have the statistical results back from that exercise. So our big data cruncher, looking through the room, analyzed all the statistics on each of the different objects. And what you see is that all these objects are actually making sense to actually get your business done. So it's both the more classical customer product supplier and the weblog as well, because we just figured out we can use the weblog to understand how we should be doing our product MDM, right? So the point is, what we're going to figure out is saying, where are the objectives? What am I going to try to do with my data? Both the structured, the semi-structured, and the unstructured. So what is the risk if we don't do it properly, and how do we set it up? So the question that we need to address is, where do we put our energy? Where do we try to get sense and make sense of things? So let's go a little bit deeper and try to analyze this thing. Let's assume that we want to increase revenue. Anybody wants to increase revenue? Of course, yes. All the others are in the non-profit, I guess, and then we want to increase impact. That's another way of looking at it. So if you want to increase the revenue, you can take a customer-centric viewpoint, saying, I want to better understand the customer, so I can have a targeted offer that this is something that you will buy. Or I can take a product-centric, saying, if you buy this, you're also likely to buy that, right? Because I know if you buy the GPS, then I can upsell you, and then I can say, hey, you need to update the cards, because we're building so many new roads that you're missing the opportunity. So that's the product-centric view. If you bought the GPS last year, I will sell you the update of the GPS this year. And I'll keep doing that, right? So that's, if you understand the product, you can understand where you can sell. But if you look at it from a data point of view, the question is, how many other things are happening that will help me to do this better? So there's a lot of data within your organization that will improve you and improve your way of doing this. And looking at it like this is what I would call an information-centric organization. And a lot of the organizations in the past have never been information-centric. They don't focus on the capabilities and the potential that you have. They typically focus on the business functions. And what business functions do is they slice and they dice the information up into pieces that you don't recognize it anymore. So the point is, can you get to be truly information-centric and look at it and saying, okay, what do you want to do? Increase revenue. Anybody who had you probably have a yearly objective, right? This is a target for this year. How many of you actually have information? Is it you? Is it me? Yeah? So I figured out this thing is sort of intermittently working. So how many of you actually said, when we want to increase revenue, how many of you think that information is a part of the answer? All right. we have some arms moving, right? So that's basically what we're trying to do, and this is what is 2014 is all about, to actually get that data insight. Because if you want to sell something, is the product available? Where can I buy it? These are all kinds of questions that customers will be asking. And this is what's going to stand between you and your objective and reaching the objective. It's all data-driven. Of course, the organization and the logistics need to follow, but the data will actually make the difference. So, let's have a look at this informal, harder to get value from data. Because I think most of you have figured out the transactions, and most of you have dealt with the MDM part, so maybe not completely, but we're quite on the way to do that. So if we look at this data that is hard to get value from, which is typically the informal events, it's not a single problem. And this is what is wrong with the word big data. This is not one problem. This is actually a multitude of things that can be solved in a multitude of ways. So let's have a look at this thing. And Doug Laney has published a paper, as I said, with Meta Group, and he talked about 3 V's. And I guess everybody should know by now the 3 V's. And he basically says you have to deal with volume, you have to deal with velocity, and you have to deal with variability. Now, one of the issues with the definition is that this not only says something about the data itself, but it's essentially saying something about your ability to do something with it. Because what is the definition of big? As I take you back to my COBOL days when we were discussing the 2-byte date versus the 4-byte date, we thought that 2 bytes was big. Because 100,000 times 2 bytes, that was a lot. So that is a sliding scale. What you call big today is something else tomorrow. Because there's something which is called Moore's Law, and Moore's Law says that we double our capacity to process things every 18 months, which basically means I have this vision that one day I might be a grandfather, and my grandchildren will come and visit me, and they will tell me, "Grandpa, can you please tell me the story about the 2 terabyte data warehouse?" And they will be laughing. Because I was, oh yeah, the 2 terabyte data warehouse. Yeah, that was a 6-month project. And they probably did that in kindergarten, because by then the capabilities of storing 2 terabytes are not the same that we have today. So big is the pointless exercise, it's volume expression. The velocity is something else. I mean, have you heard the story about the new fiber cable they're putting between New York and London? Anybody caught that story? Yeah. So they're making a new fiber cable between New York and London. And the reason they're doing it, what do you think? Because the old cable was max capacity? And the answer is no, because there was plenty of capacity. What was the answer? The answer is because the cable is 80 kilometers shorter. I will repeat, 80 kilometers shorter. You're like, wait a minute, 80 kilometers? And then you take your little Einstein mathematical book, and you take the speed of the laser, and you calculate how much time difference you get from 80 kilometers. And the answer is, not a lot. Why would I spend so much money installing a cable to go an itsy-bitsy faster? Because of the trading and the fact that you can be quicker with the trade, that's where the money is. There's one small problem for the people installing the cable. And what was the problem? That legislation said that the trade is only final after 50 milliseconds. Too bad. So all the effort was for nothing because it's a pointless exercise now. So the point is, velocity is changing. We do things faster, we do things quicker. And the variability is that when you go into areas which have not been well defined and well structured, then you have to deal with the changes that are happening. Has anybody ever tried to write a tweet? I guess so, somebody tweeted already. What are the semantics of a tweet? It's 140 characters long, okay? And otherwise? You can put any structure you want, and then we use hashtags. And I don't want to quote the number of times that hashtags have backfired on people. There's the McDonald's story, there's so many stories out there. It's not well governed, so the structure of these things is hard to do. And if you go, and if you come from a relational world, what you try to do is you try to classify things and structure it and saying the first that's the name, and then the first name, and so on and so on. So, hard to do. There's a fourth dimension that I would like to add, and this is where Doug gets a bit upset. Actually, I was in a kind of a Twitter discussion with him a while ago, and I said, yeah, but wait a minute, another dimension is the veracity. Because I have a friend, and I still call him a friend, who thinks that statistics are the answer to every problem. And what he says is, when they look at the data set, and they says, anything that doesn't fit my way of thinking, I discard it. And the statisticians call these things outliers. They say, oh, this can't be right, just get rid of it. It messes up my model. And if you are a master data management person, or somebody that is interested in data quality, what's the first thing you will do? Oh, wait a minute, these outliers are actually the interesting part, right? So the veracity, what we're doing today is we are bringing data into our insight world that is of a quality level that is not necessarily predictable. Now you can do two things with that. You can take the hard line, data quality, data governance line that says, if it's not 100% correct, or if it's not within my boundaries of comfort, I will discard it. Or you can take the statistician's view that says, I will take my data set and get anything which is an outlier and take it out. But that's something that we need to formally manage, and this is why I'm introducing that fourth dimension of veracity. You have to have a process that actually say, wait a minute, can I make sense of this? And what is the impact of lower quality? What will I do? Throw everything out or try to keep something? And this is a very interesting thought that you have to look at when you start looking at your data, which dimension is the most fundamental one. Okay? So if you look at that volume thing, volume is basically simple. If somebody says, your data is twice too big to be processed today, what's the only thing you need to do? Does everybody have the answer? I just gave the answer. Wait 18 months and you handle it, right? So come back in 18 months and my capacity has doubled, I'm fine. But if your data set is now growing by a factor of 100, 1,000, 10,000, how many months do you have to wait? A little bit too much. So at some point, what you see is that not everything scales linear, and you have to start looking at, yeah, but there's other ways of doing things. So it's kind of interesting to see the database world, when we had stability for 20 to 30 years, what is happening today? I would say there's a database model and engine every day. It's like the ants. There's like how many types, MongoDB, you can Voldemort, all these different types of database engines, they're getting out there. Why? Because we're trying to do things differently. Now, when you start looking at these volume and capability of handling the volume, the point is, if you need to store 6 terabytes of data, and I'm telling you that out of the 6 terabytes of data, if you lose 10%, it's okay, because people keep tweeting. On what kind of platform are you going to put that? Are you going to put that on cheaper hardware, where you basically say, the management dimension and the cost dimension have to be in sync? So this is one of the questions that we're basically saying, look at what you want to do and look at what the problem is, and then see if you can find the proper technology underneath. And this is where I think on the same page as Barry, that you really start looking at your data architecture and saying, what do I have? And what is the best place to put things? You can put everything on the high volume, high quality, reliable, and if you don't pay attention, so this is a little bit for the techies in the room, if you look at everything that is duplication, remote copy, and so on, if you have a byte, it goes into 16 times that byte, right? And you don't want to lose the banking transaction, so it's okay to do that. But are you going to do that for your 6 terabytes of feeds or images? No. So you need to have a differentiated landscape that says, is my pricing model consistent with what I'm trying to do? Now, we just violated rule number 1 of the car salesman. What is rule number 1 of the car salesman? Never give the customer an option. When you walk into a showroom, they will tell you, oh, this is sports car, this is, sir, this is for you, right? And never give out. Because if you say, well, we still have another model, you know, this is not working, right? That's what every car salesperson does. Give you one option. And then throw some stuff in. Don't start introducing new models. Doesn't work, okay? So what we just did is we introduced 3 extra models to look at. And we actually introduced another question that is a very difficult question, and now I'm addressing the business people in the room. What are you trying to do? What problem are you trying to solve? And this is one of the issues here, saying, yeah, but what is your problem? I don't mean this personally when I say what's your problem. I say, what business problem are you trying to solve? So to figure out which technology and how we need to go about, you really have to understand what is the problem that you're dealing with. And then, only then, you can go on to the next step, is to figure out a landscape that actually makes sense. I said, the velocity thing is a whole different story. Because typically, when you start looking at, if you're in the utility sector, if you look at smart grids, if you look at smarter cities, at controlling traffic lights, at working with your utilities in a more intelligent way, fraud detection, these things are not necessarily about longer term, bigger volumes. They're at understanding the last 5 minutes. That's a whole different problem. So this is where we say, yeah, but I don't really need a database. I need a complex event processing engine, right? So again, under that one flag of big data, we now already realized that there's 2 different things, at least. One, to deal the volume and store the cheap kind of data. And the second one is to say, yeah, but speed and time to reaction, it's a different solution. Okay, so you go to instantaneous seconds, and actually the pure essence of that is installing a new fiber cable between London and New York. That's the ultimate. We're down to nanoseconds, right? Does it make sense? I'm just leaving it out there, okay? But people often get confused when they say, I need to have real time. Because if you look at cross-selling, right? So when you go to a website, when somebody looks at a product, they would like to say, this is a cross-sell opportunity. Now you could say, or you could argue, that this requires real-time analysis, because it requires you to understand the customer, it requires you to understand the product. But most of the stuff that you need to do here can actually be calculated. So it doesn't really require you to do a lot of heavy computing lifting at the time.